Okay, let's dive in. So get this. The biggest container ships on the planet, these real giants, actually docking in West Africa.
Yeah.
And for the first time ever.
Yeah, that really happened this past week.
And it wasn't in a vacuum, right? It's happening with all this other stuff going on. Security threats still very much there, infrastructure challenges, global policy shifts.
Exactly. It was, a week that really underlined how dynamic things are.
Yeah.
And how vital Africa's link to the oceans is.
Welcome, everyone, to the Deep Dive. We're going to unpack what's been happening in the African maritime sector, looking specifically at the sources covering the week of May 25th to June 1st, 2025.
That's right. And we've gone through quite a stack of material for you. News reports, security briefings, market updates, official statements, the lot.
The idea is to cut through all that noise.
And pull out the really key insights, the important bits from this period.
So our mission really is to help you get a quick handle on the main developments, the challenges, the opportunities in this sector right now.
We want to make sense of it all, figure out what's driving things, and kind of show how the pieces fit together.
Think of it as your shortcut to getting up to speed on a really crucial area.
Okay, so where should we start? I think maybe with the big commercial shifts.
Yeah.
That headline news really sets the scene.
Yeah, let's kick off there. The arrival of those absolutely massive ships in West Africa. MSC deployed the MSC Deleta and the MSC Turkey.
And these are the ULCVs, ultra-large container vessels. We're talking 24,000 TEU capacity each. Just huge.
24,000 standard containers. It's hard to even picture.
It really is. And the key thing, according to the sources, this is genuinely the first time ships of this size have called anywhere in the subcontinent.
Wow. So that's MSC making a big statement.
A huge statement. It's read as, a major vote of confidence in the future trade growth between Asia and West Africa.
Okay, but hang on. Bringing in ships that big, that can't be simple. What does it actually mean for the ports on the receiving end?
Yeah, that's the crux of it, isn't it? The sources are pretty clear. This puts immediate, intense pressure on ports like Lomé, Abidjan, Tema, Kribi.
Pressure how?
Well, they need urgent upgrades. To handle these giants consistently, you need deeper water, deeper drafts. You need much longer quaysides to berth them. And you need bigger cranes, much bigger, to reach across those wide decks and handle the sheer volume of boxes.
So it's not just MSC investing. It forces the ports to invest massively, too.
Precisely. And if they can't, or don't,
then what happens?
Well, the analysis suggests you'll likely see a kind of stratification. A few key ports will make the investment, become the major hubs capable of handling ULCVs.
And the others?
They'll probably become feeder ports, served by smaller ships running cargo to and from those main hubs. It could totally reshape the regional shipping map.
And if that happens, getting the cargo inland from those few super hubs, that becomes even more of a headache, right?
Absolutely. It pushes the whole logistics challenge further inland. You suddenly need much, much better connections, road, rail, maybe even waterways, to move all that cargo efficiently out of the hub port and into the wider region.
Otherwise, the port efficiency gained is lost on the land side.
Exactly. The bottleneck just shifts location. It becomes an intermodal nightmare if that part isn't ready.
And it wasn't just MSC making big strategic moves, was it? Hapag-Lloyd had an announcement, too.
Yes, that's right. Part of their wider strategy 2030. Hapag-Lloyd is actually doubling its regional management structure in Africa, going from 2 hubs to 4.
4 hubs, so splitting it up.
Yeah. Distinct management for West, Central, South, and East Africa.
Interesting. What's the thinking there, according to the sources?
It looks like a clear recognition that Africa isn't just one single market. The continent's incredibly diverse economically.
So they need different approaches for different regions. Seems like it. The analysis suggests they need tailored strategies, local expertise, specific service offerings for different areas. It points towards them expecting varied, maybe more nuanced growth across the continent, not just one big wave.
Okay, so you've got these long-term strategic plays, bigger ships, reorganizing management, aiming for future efficiency. But what about right now? Costs.
Yeah, that's the immediate hit. Carriers like MSC, also CMA, CGM, announced freight rate increases starting June 1st from Asia to various African regions.
So while they're planning for the long term, importers and exporters are feeling the pinch right now.
That's the reality. These rate hikes add immediate cost pressure. It's the other side of that coin.
And that cost pressure connects back to the infrastructure piece, doesn't it? We talked about the ports needing upgrades for the big ships, but the landside stuff is just as vital.
Oh, absolutely. In many places, it's arguably the biggest constraint. You can have the world's best cranes, but if the trucks can't get in and out smoothly...
It all grinds to a halt, pretty much. And the sources gave a really concrete example this week, that Bayhead Road upgrade kicking off in Durban, South Africa.
Right, I saw that. That road handles something like 13,000 vehicles a day. Crucial for the port.
Exactly. And it was apparently in a bad state, really slowing things down, causing safety issues. Getting that fixed, with completion expected around December 2025, is huge for easing a major bottleneck in South Africa's whole logistics system.
It just shows how basic maintenance can impact national trade.
Totally. And we also saw investments in more, let's say, specialized logistics. Maersk, for instance, previewed a new cold storage facility in Cape Town.
Ah, yes, for the cold chain, perishables.
Exactly. At a place called Belkin Logistics Park. It's all about integrated cold chain logistics, specifically targeting exporters of high-value stuff like grapes, citrus, things that can spoil easily.
And the potential losses without good cold chains are massive, aren't they? The sources mentioned a figure.
They did, yeah. Up to our $1.5 billion. That's about, what, maybe $80 million just for table grapes annually due to breaks in the cold chains.
Wow.
So this facility is designed to tackle that. Direct port links, multimodal access, and interestingly designed to run on renewables.
So it's also about sustainability, higher value services.
Right. Moving beyond just basic transport.
Okay, and sticking with South Africa for a moment, the situation with Transnet, the state-owned transport company, is still a big ongoing story.
Yeah, the reports mentioned Transnet selling off some non-core assets, and there was talk about a possible R51 billion state guarantee, plus ongoing critical discussions with labor unions.
It's such a key entity.
Absolutely. As the backbone for so much of the country's logistics, it's under massive pressure to reform, to perform better. Its efficiency directly impacts ports and rail across the board.
And just to underline how fragile some of this critical infrastructure can be, we saw that situation in Libya with the port of Tripoli.
Yeah, that was a really stark reminder this week. The port basically shut down because of political violence.
Completely unrelated to maritime issues, but it cripples trade.
Exactly. It shows how non-maritime instability can just paralyze vital infrastructure. Yeah. One source described Libya's shipping sector as, quote, teetering on the edge of collapse. It really highlights the need for stability and resilience.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit to maritime security. It feels like this is always a major theme, a persistent issue.
It really is. And it's constantly evolving, too.
We saw that big multinational exercise, Open Game Express 2025, wrap up recently.
No, E25, yeah. 30 African nations involved, plus international partners, really focused on boosting cooperation against piracy IUU fishing, especially in the Gulf of Guinea. It's a major effort in building regional capacity.
But, and there's always a but, isn't there? Despite that huge training exercise, incidents were still happening around the same time.
And that's the tough reality the sources really bring home. It highlights that gap between, training exercises and the actual day-to-day operational threats.
What specifically did we see?
Well, there was a cargo ship robbery reported in Lagos, Nigeria, around May 23rd. Same day, a tanker robbery at anchor off Luanda in Angola. Thieves apparently stole ship's property from a storeroom.
And then there was that warning about a pirate group.
Yes. The MDAT Gauge issued a warning about a suspected pirate attack group, a PAG, sighted southwest of Brass in Nigeria. So the threat remains active.
And there was also that quite concerning advisory, wasn't there, about tactics changing and maybe the location of attacks shifting.
That was a really key piece of intel, yeah. It came from India's Directorate General of Shipping. They flagged a couple of worrying trends.
Like what?
Firstly, an escalation in tactics. Specifically, reports of pirates using gas-cutting tools to breach ship citadels, the secure rooms where crews shelter.
That sounds much more aggressive, more sophisticated.
It is. It shows a higher level of planning and determination. But the other point was maybe even more significant strategically.
Which was?
The warning about a potential southward shift in pirate activity. Moving away from the traditional Nigerian hotspots towards areas off Gabon, Equatorial Guinea, maybe even, the advisory suggested, impacting areas closer to South Africa eventually.
A southward shift. Why would that happen?
Well, the analysis points towards something called the balloon effect. You squeeze piracy in one area through patrols and security measures.
And it bulges out somewhere else?
Kind of, yeah. The criminal activity gets pushed into areas that might be less patrolled, or where coastal states have less experience dealing with it. It means security strategies have to adapt. They can't just focus on the old hotspots.
Makes sense. It wasn't all bad news on the security front, though, was it? Some positives?
No, absolutely. There were positive developments, too. Tunisia, for example, commissioned 2 new patrol boats donated by the U.S. That's a direct boost to their ability to monitor their maritime borders.
Good. And that big drug bust.
Right. The Royal Navy-led task force, CTF-150, had a major seizure up in the North Arabian Sea. Huge haul.
Over a ton of heroin, plus hundreds of kilos of hashish and amphetamines. The value was something like $36 million.
Yeah, massive. And it really underscores that link between the drug trade and the criminal networks that operate at sea, sometimes funding other activities like piracy or terrorism. Disrupting those flows is critical.
But even with successes like that, there are still worries about basic capabilities, right? Like those concerns about South Africa's coastal radar systems.
Yes, reports surfaced alleging failures or gaps in the Sandy F's radar network. If that's accurate, it's a fundamental problem.
Because you can't respond to what you can't see.
Exactly. Maritime domain awareness, just knowing what's out there in your waters, it all starts with effective surveillance. Radar gaps undermine everything else. Patrols, response efforts, they all become less effective.
Okay, let's pivot again. Thinking about the policy environment, the governance, regulations, Africa's maritime sector isn't operating in isolation. Global trends have a big impact.
For sure. And UNCTAD report highlighted this past week warned about escalating global tariffs.
And the worry is how that hits African economies.
Particularly the more vulnerable ones, least developed countries, small island developing states. They could be hit hardest.
Did it mention specifics? Like the U.S. tariffs?
It did note concern about a potential jump in U.S. tariffs around July 2025, affecting certain developing countries, and that could impact key African export sectors, things like agriculture, textiles.
So decisions made far away can really hurt trade competitiveness here.
Definitely. It can erode the benefits of preferential trade access that many African countries rely on.
The sources also touched on climate finance, right? In a hypothetical context.
Yes. One source linked an Amnesty International warning about potential foreign aid cuts to specific concerns for African island states.
Because they need funding for climate adaptation.
Desperately. They're on the front lines of rising sea levels, more extreme weather. So any potential cuts to climate finance or shifts in major nations' aid policies directly impact their ability to cope with climate change hitting their coasts and maritime zones.
It's all interconnected. And then there are new international regulations coming down the pipe, too.
Yep, things like the new fire safety rules for RRO and RoPax vessels, big car ferries and vehicle carriers.
What's changing there?
They'll need mandatory fixed water monitors on the weather decks. It comes into force January 1st, 2026, driven partly by concerns over fires involving electric vehicles being transported.
So African operators, ports, they need to stay on top of these global rule changes.
Absolutely. To maintain access, to ensure safety standards are met, you have to keep up.
But it's not just about reacting to global stuff. We also saw positive steps happening within Africa, right? Strengthening local governance.
Definitely. Some good examples came up. Kenya's working with the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, to advance its own maritime security laws.
Okay.
Zimbabwe is finalizing its first ever comprehensive fisheries and aquaculture bill, which is a big step for managing those sectors.
And that cooperation agreement between South Africa and Ghana.
Yeah, that looks significant, focusing on working together on ocean governance, regulations, training seafarers, tackling shared blue economy challenges.
So these are like the building blocks for better management.
Exactly. Crucial building blocks. They create the legal frameworks, the collaborative structures you need to manage resources sustainably, ensure safety, and deal with issues that cross borders, like illegal fishing.
Right, which brings us nicely to fisheries and the wider blue economy. Huge potential there. You mentioned aquaculture.
Massive potential. That World Aquaculture Safari 25 event coming up in Uganda, it's being billed as the biggest aquaculture meeting ever in Africa. Big focus on tilapia, seaweed farming, especially in East Africa.
That region's seen as the fastest growing aquaculture hub on the continent.
Apparently so. And aquaculture is just so important, isn't it? For food security, for jobs, diversifying economies, especially as wild fish stocks are under so much pressure.
And Zimbabwe's new bill helps support that growth.
Yeah, by providing a proper legal framework, better governance for that growing sector.
But that potential is always shadowed by the problem of IU fishing, isn't it? Illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing.
It really is. It casts a long shadow. It's no accident that the Open Game Express exercise included scenarios specifically targeting IUU.
Because the impact is just devastating.
Huge impact. Reports consistently show it hammering fish stocks, especially in West Africa, undermining the livelihoods of local, small-scale fishers. It costs governments millions in lost revenue, and is often linked to other crimes, too.
Often involving large foreign fleets operating outside the rules.
That's frequently the case, yeah. Tackling it needs better surveillance back to maritime domain awareness, plus more patrols, and much stronger international cooperation on things like vessel tracking, licensing, and actually enforcing the rules.
It's a tough nut to crack.
Very tough.
Finally, on the blue economy, the sources also mentioned recreational fishing getting more recognition.
Yeah, that was interesting. South Africa is set to host the World Recreational Fisheries Conference in 2026. It signals that the economic value of recreational fishing tourism, local jobs, is being taken more seriously.
So it's about integrating it properly into national plans.
Exactly. Seeing how it fits alongside commercial fishing, artisanal fishing, aquaculture, managing the whole marine space sustainably.
Okay, so if we try and pull all these threads together from the last week or so, it's a really complex picture, isn't it? But incredibly active.
Definitely dynamic.
Yeah.
You've got major global players making big commercial bets like those huge MSC ships, signaling confidence in growth. But yeah, that investment bumps right up against persistent, evolving security threats and critical gaps in infrastructure, both at the ports and inland. Plus, ongoing governance challenges.
It really is that mix, isn't it? Huge promise alongside some really pressing, difficult challenges.
And they all need integrated solutions, adaptive responses. You can't just focus on one piece.
And why should you, our listener, care about all this? Well, it directly impacts things we all rely on.
Absolutely. Global trade flows, the reliability of supply chains, maybe even the cost of goods you buy. It affects security on critical sea lanes. And ultimately, the economic future and stability of an entire continent.
Africa's maritime space is just central to so many global issues.
It really is. It's where global economics, regional security, local livelihoods, environmental concerns, they all converge.
So maybe a final thought to leave everyone with, something that stood out from the sources this week.
Well, one thing that struck me, we're seeing this huge focus from global shipping lines on connecting Asia and Africa with ever bigger ships, potentially creating these few dominant super hubs.
Right.
But at the same time, unlocking Africa's internal potential, improving intra-African maritime links, which is supposedly key for the big Continental Free Trade Area project. That still feels like a much bigger challenge. It was mentioned at conferences like Port Connect Africa, but
lags behind the global connections.
Oh, it seems like it might be. So the question to ponder is, what happens to Africa's own economic integration if its internal sea links don't keep pace with these massive global connections being forged?
That's definitely something to think about. What are the long-term implications if global trade routes into Africa are strengthened much faster than trade routes within Africa?
Exactly. Food for thought as we watch this space evolve.